Okay, we've got up next, we're talking about water quality funding 319 programs with Kati Carberry, water quality analyst. Kati is a native Idahoan who received her Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Science from the University of Idaho and her master's degree in public policy and environmental planning. She has been a watershed coordinator with DEQ for over 6 years and oversees the non-point source program for Idaho's Southwest Basin. Kati is going to be discussing DEQ's 319 and State Ag BMP Best Management Practice Grant Program as a lead-in to Valley Soil and Water Conservation District's presentation. Kati, thank you, and okay, you can take it away.
Thanks, Gary. Can everyone hear? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Kati Carberry, and I work for the Department of Environmental Quality in the Boise Regional Office. And I oversee the non-point source program for our region, and that's Boise Southwest Regional Office. And we cover Ada, Adams, Boise, Canyon, Elmore, Jim, Owyhee, Payette Valley, and Washington counties. So it's a fairly populated and large region. So today I was asked to talk about the non-point source funding that DEQ offers. And since I only have a few minutes, this is going to be very brief, just kind of an overview of the 319 program and also the State Ag BMP Best Management Program, just so you know what that acronym stands for. And then Dorina is going to talk more specifically about the projects that have been implemented in the North Fork Payette watershed using these funding mechanisms. So in 1987, Congress established the Non-Point Source Management Program under the Section 319 of the Clean Water Act. And Section 319 was created to help states be able to address non-point source pollution. So unlike point sources, non-point source pollution in general not regulated through water quality permits. And so Congress created the Non-Point Source Program to identify waters that are affected by non-point sources and then implement voluntary management programs to control or eliminate these sources of pollution that otherwise aren't regulated. So quickly, I just want to go over what we mean when we say non-point source pollution. So non-point source pollution is different from point source pollution in that it's not coming directly out of a pipe or from a discrete place in time. Non-point source pollution generally results from land runoff and or seepage. So as the water runoff moves over and through the land, it picks up and carries away natural and human-made pollutants. And then those end up in lakes, rivers, wetlands, and groundwaters. And that's what we mean when we say non-point source. So let's see, sorry about that. So here we have some classic examples of non-point source pollution. So this first picture in the upper left, we have a situation where erosion is taking place and there's no vegetation on the landscape to help stop that dirt from running off. So as the water runs over the land, it's basically carrying mud into the nearest water body. So that's an example of a non-point source. And then in the upper right, we have a situation where cattle are grazing in and around the stream. And I'm sure most of us have seen this. Unfortunately, cattle love this area because the riparian vegetation that grows near a water body's edge is typically lush and green. But the problem is that they also leave their waste right there in the creek. So as everyone knows, cattle go to the bathroom where they're eating. And then in this third picture in the lower left-hand corner, we have runoff from row crops. So anything that is applied, such as fertilizers or pesticides, plus any loose soil, ends up in adjacent waters. And then in the last example, we have a stream where the banks are nude of any vegetation and the banks have nothing to stabilize them. So this is kind of a situation where Michael Young was from Fish and Game was talking about the eroded banks. And in this example, as the banks are eroded, that sediment ends up in the creek, making it hard for aquatic life to survive. So none of these examples of non-point source pollution are regulated by the Clean Water Act. However, each year the EPA uses that congressional appropriation to provide funding to states to implement the 319 program and fund projects that address these types of sources. So examples of projects that would be eligible to receive funding for these non-point sources include, like in the upper left-hand corner, are vegetation plantings to stop that erosion from occurring. And then there's exclusionary fencing to keep livestock out of waters. Conversion from flood to sprinkler pivot irrigation to stop that overland flow of water. And then willow and riparian plantings to stabilize banks. So those are some of the examples that you would see funded to address non-point sources. Okay, so EPA distributes 319 money to DEQ, and then we're responsible for managing the 319 grants that fund the projects to address the non-point sources across the state. So here's kind of a quick overview of some basic information about the 319 grants. So DEQ accepts applications from April 15th through July 15th. And then in October, we begin ranking all of the proposed projects across the state. And then funding for the selected projects typically begins in July of the following year. So from the time the applicants apply, it's over a year before they see that funding requirement. So this can be in-kind services, materials, or anything else that's spent towards the project. So now that I've talked a little bit about the 319 program, I was going to give a quick overview of the state agricultural best management funding, the BMP funding. So in the 2017 legislative session, Idaho's legislature appropriated an ongoing $500,000 from the general fund that goes to DEQ to implement agricultural best management practices. And they're supposed to be in high priority watersheds throughout Idaho. So this funding is only to be used to address non-point source pollution from agriculture. So this one's a little more specific than EPA's in that it has to go to agricultural sources. So these grants are similar to the requirements of EPA's 319 grants, except that they have a really tight turnaround. So applications can be submitted from March 23rd until April 24th. And then they're reviewed and ranked in May by DEQ. And then the selected projects are funded in June of that same year. So that's a really quick turnaround. Then once the contract is signed, the project must be completed in 1 year. And so that's a little bit difficult for most people because, you know, that means that they have to have shovel-ready projects ready to go because they only have a year to spend that money. And then like projects in the 319 program, they have a $250,000 cap, and they also require a 40% match by the applicant. And then, so really quickly, I wanted to give you a snapshot since we're talking about the North Fork Payette watershed, a snapshot of the Southwest region and where the 319 state ag funding has been spent. So this is money spent by both 319 and state funds. So this is a pie chart showing the watersheds in the Southwest region by percentage of funding each has received since 1996. So when you're looking at this pie chart, you can see that the North Fork Payette watershed has received 20% of the total funding that the Southwest region has received since 96. The North Fork Payette watershed is second only to the Lower Boise. And so I just want to point out that Valley County has been really instrumental in getting good projects in the North Fork Payette watershed. So I think this is a great place to stop and let Dorina talk more specifically about the projects that they have implemented here in the North Fork. And then just lastly, I have my contact information. So if anyone's interested in learning more or has questions about our grants, I would be happy to help out with anyone who's wanting to apply or just has questions. So I encourage everyone to just contact me or reach out because the more projects that are proposed, the better. I think that's it.
Excellent. Thank you, Katie. I want to ask you to please look at the Q&A section. There's quite a few questions for you. There's also, I believe, a new question for John and a question for Emily as well. So if our panelists could take a glance that way.